Under the scorching, merciless sun of Canaan, which parched the dry grasses and cracked the earth, old Jacob stood, leaning on his weather-beaten staff. This was no mere staff, but a witness to all his journeys, his struggle with the angel at Jabbok, his grief and his joy. His eyes, deep set and framed by a mesh of wrinkles that told the story of a whole century, were clear as spring water, gazing into the boundless, heated horizon. There, on the boundary between heaven and earth, where diffused light danced above the sands, the dust of chariots rose into the sky like a spectral pillar. This was the dust of Egypt, the land that had swallowed and returned his son Joseph. The very Joseph he had mourned, imagining him torn apart by wild beasts, whose blood-stained tunic he had kept in a chest for years, like the mummy of his own unbearable pain. But now this son, once lost, was alive. Not merely alive, but mighty, the right hand of Pharaoh himself, the second man next to a god on the Nile. The news arrived like an explosion that demolished a wall of 50 years of sorrow. Yet instead of all-consuming joy, Jacob's heart constricted with a new, no less sharp, fear. Would he abandon his sacred land, the homeland of the promises, forever? Canaan was not just pasture. It was the seal God had placed upon the soul of his lineage. If he left, would he not lose what the Almighty had promised his father, Isaac, and his grandfather Abraham when he called him to leave Ur of the Chaldees? This was an internal struggle between earthly, carnal love for his son, for whom he was ready to sacrifice everything, and the invisible, yet unbreakable burden of the sacred covenant he carried on his old shoulders. Jacob, now Israel, stood at the crossroads, feeling the history of 3 generations weighing on his staff. Chapter 1: The Journey to Egypt. When the incredible first tidings of Joseph, arising from the loud words of his cornered sons, reached Jacob, his heart, accustomed to pain and hardened by grief, refused to believe. His mind immediately rebelled, whispering of another cruel trick of fate, of a mirage induced by famine and aged delirium. He sat in his tent, wrapped in a woolen cloak, appearing like a statue of despair hewn from stone, while his sons, just returned from Egypt, passionately and almost frantically tried to convince him. But old Israel was deaf to their words. How could he believe that the one whose blood he had mourned was now the ruler over the Nile, and not dust in a forgotten ravine? However, words are only sound, but things are testimony. And when the epic scene of wealth sent by Pharaoh unfolded before his eyes, 8 huge Egyptian chariots, adorned with gilding and carvings, powerful, unseen in Canaan, raising clouds of golden sand. Each chariot was laden with gifts that blinded the eye. In the sacks, decorated with bright Egyptian patterns, lay not just provisions, but symbols of power and abundance. Fragrant Egyptian spices, filling the air with aromas Canaan had never known. The finest flower of the Nile, exquisite wines, and silk fabrics, soft as feathers. When Jacob ran his wrinkled hand over the smooth surface of one of the chariots, feeling its strength and reality, and inhaled the thick, sweet scent of balsams and myrrh emanating from the bags, his inner resistance, his wall of grief, began slowly to crumble. He did not just believe, he felt the touch of divine providence in this miracle. And then, for the first time in many years, a crystal-clear, sweet tear of unrestrained, all-consuming joy appeared on his cheek. Not the bitter tear of sorrow. God had truly not forsaken him, had not forgotten him, and had not allowed the last ray of his life to vanish into darkness. gathering his sons, daughters, grandchildren, 70 souls who embodied the future of the nation, and all his innumerable flocks, Jacob set out. Their journey turned into the migration of a nation, not just a family. It was an exodus from the land, but an exodus marked by the promise of return. Every step was heavy. Every turn of his head back toward the burnt-out hills provoked doubt. How many times might he have trembled, wondering, is this not betrayal? Is he not fleeing from God? When they reached Beersheba, the well of the oath, the place where Isaac himself had once called upon the name of the Lord, Jacob felt he could not proceed without divine permission. He stopped. On this sacred boundary, standing between the desolation of Canaan and the splendor of Egypt, he built an altar. Jacob offered a sacrifice to the God of his father Isaac. He did not just burn meat. He burned his doubt, his fear, his pride. He remained silent, watching the smoke rise toward the night sky, asking for a sign. And that night, while the camp slept, when only the stars shone over the wilderness, a sleep descended upon Jacob. But it was not a mere sleep, but an epic, majestic vision. From a cluster of light that appeared above the altar, God himself, the head of the covenant, spoke to him with a voice that echoed in the depths of his soul. I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I will go down with you. I will not leave you for a moment, and I myself will bring you up again, so that you may see the fulfillment of all my promises. These words were more than permission. They were a light in the complete darkness of his doubts. Jacob understood. His path to Joseph was not a flight. It was an act of submission to providence. For only in Egypt, far from the temptations and enmity of the Canaanite tribes, could his small family turn into a great nation. Waking at dawn, he felt a burden lift from his shoulders. He was ready. Israel, the one who wrestled with God, now followed him. The journey continued, and now it was no longer a migration, but a march toward the destiny charted by God. Chapter 2. Meeting Joseph and Pharaoh. Finally, awaiting the tired but hopeful travelers, the green meadows of Goshen unfolded, the best, most fertile land of Egypt, lying far from the luxurious cities and the temptations of paganism. And then, in the rays of the noon sun that illuminated the valley, the chariots appeared. This was not just Joseph. It was a procession of majesty and power, worthy of a vizier. Joseph's chariots, adorned with gold and feathers, rolled up to the meeting place, raising the last dust before halting. Jacob stood. His old figure, illuminated by the sun, trembled, but not from cold or fear, but from an overwhelming emotion that was impossible to restrain. Before him stood his son, his dying memory, his eternal sorrow, and his greatest miracle. Joseph, casting off the burden of the vizier, showing all his filial love, rushed to his father. He did not wait for old Jacob to take a step. He crossed the distance between them, embodying 50 years of separation in a single impulse. When Joseph embraced Jacob, a moment occurred that ruptured time. It was not just the embrace of a father and son, it was the meeting of two epochs, two worlds, the severe, prophetic Canaan and the magnificent, mighty Egypt. Joseph pressed his father to his chest, which was now embroidered with symbols of power, and wept long upon his shoulder, forgetting his high rank, the etiquette, and the guards. These were not tears of grief, but a vortex of emotions. Tears for a lost childhood, for injustice, for loneliness in a foreign land. for the joy of an unexpected reunion. The tears that had gathered in his heart for years, like water in an arid well, now poured like long-awaited rain after a drought, washing away all offenses and sufferings. Jacob, for his part, only whispered, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, and know that you are still alive." After this moving, cleansing moment, Joseph, showing impeccable respect, brought his old father before the most powerful ruler in the world. Pharaoh, sitting on his throne, surrounded by the glitter of untold wealth and the hieroglyphs of majesty, received the elder with a respect rarely shown to anyone but the gods. Perhaps he saw in Jacob not just a shepherd, but the father of the one who had saved his kingdom. Jacob approached the throne without bowing, for he was Israel, the wrestler with God. He stood before Pharaoh, and his wrinkled yet dignified face radiated an unearthly calm. In response to the royal greeting, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. He placed his aged but strong hands upon the head of the ruler of Egypt. His words, uttered with the humility of a pilgrim but the power of a prophet, sounded like thunder in the majestic hall. Jacob, the shepherd and wanderer, blessed the most powerful king. It was an act of spiritual supremacy, reminding Pharaoh who the true Lord over all kingdoms was. Pharaoh, struck by his blessing, asked, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob answered with wise bitterness, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." This meeting sealed the destiny of the lineage. Jacob blessed Pharaoh again, finally confirming peace and agreement. Thus the Israelites settled in the best land of Egypt, in Goshen, the land of Ramesses. It was a blooming Nile valley, where the fertile earth, like God's mercy, gave them everything they needed. Here they pastured their innumerable flocks. Here, under the protection of the most powerful empire, they raised their children, who multiplied with astonishing speed, and praised God, understanding that they were guests, but guests protected by the hand of providence. Chapter 3. The blessing of Joseph's sons. 17 years passed. 17 years of peace, abundance, and tranquility. Yet time, that relentless reaper, does not wait even for the chosen ones. Jacob grew old. His strength faded, like a candle burning down in the deep night. His sight dimmed, turning the surrounding world into blurred shadows and outlines. But his inner eye, the eye of the prophet, only grew sharper. When Joseph was informed that his father was ill and his days were numbered, he immediately, with a sense of urgent duty, came to him, bringing his sons, Manasseh, memory of forgotten sufferings, and Ephraim, double fruitfulness. This meeting at the dying man's bedside was deeply symbolic. It was not just familial, but national, for it was Jacob's final act as a patriarch, as the carrier of the covenant. Jacob, supported by pillows, mustered all his strength to sit up. His voice was quiet, like the whisper of an autumn wind, but filled with a power that came not from the flesh, but from the Spirit. He told Joseph about the theophany at Luz, about the promise to Abraham, about the fact that this land, Egypt, was only a temporary shelter. And then came the moment of blessing, which was to elevate Joseph's sons, half Egyptians, born of a priestly daughter, to the status of full-fledged progenitors of the tribes of Israel. Joseph positioned his sons before Jacob, the elder Manasseh, to the father's right hand, to receive the greater blessing, the younger Ephraim to the left. This order was logical, traditional, and human. But Jacob, who saw with the eyes of eternity, stretched out his wrinkled, trembling hands, and, crossing them, placed his right, blessing hand upon the head of the younger Ephraim, and the left, upon the head of the elder Manasseh. Joseph, seized by paternal pride and anxiety about maintaining tradition, seeing this, tried to correct his father's hands. His heart tightened at the thought that his father might be mistaken due to poor eyesight. He gently took Jacob's right hand, wishing to move it to Manasseh's head, and said, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." In his voice rang the sense of duty and respect for seniority. But Jacob, old Israel, not blind but seeing in the Spirit, answered decisively. His eyes, though clouded, shone with the understanding of invisible things. "I know, my son, I know. I am well aware of what I am doing." He spoke not of what he saw, but of what had been revealed to him by God. A people will also come from him, and he will be great, but his younger brother will be greater than he, and from his descendants will come a fullness of nations. In this phrase lay all the wisdom of the covenant. Not human preference, but God's choice determines destiny. The right of the firstborn does not depend on birth, but on grace and prophetic designation. Thus Jacob blessed them, crossing his hands, which became a symbol of the new order, in which the younger, Ephraim, would always precede the elder. He proclaimed, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd, my pastor, from my youth until this day, may he bless these youths. And may my name and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac be multiplied in them, and may they multiply like fish in the midst of the earth." This was a prophecy of unceasing multiplication, that these two tribes would become the key bearers of the promises in the future. Manasseh and Ephraim became the beginning of the future history, unfolding on the quiet scene of a dying legacy. Chapter 4: The Blessing of Jacob's Sons. When Jacob felt his prophetic spirit had reached its zenith, and the time of his departure was near, he gathered all his sons around him. They were no longer youths, but mature men, hardened by life, each bearing the mark of his deeds and his character. This was his last will, his testament, which was to become not just a distribution of property, but a judgment, a prophecy, and a blessing for the 12 tribes. His voice was not loud, but calm and strong, like a distant wind carrying tidings from beyond the sea. He spoke to them, looking at each one, and saw not just his son, but his descendant, his destiny, his place in the history of Israel. This was a psychological drama unfolding in prophetic words. Reuben, the firstborn, stood first, feeling the weight of his father's gaze. His words were like a sharp sword. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. You are unstable as water, and you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed." The prophecy was relentless. His sin, committed many years ago, deprived him of the highest blessing. Next followed Simeon and Levi, whose hearts were instruments of cruelty. Jacob did not bless them, but pronounced a judgment. "I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Their violent nature, manifested in Shechem, was to lead to their tribes being scattered, not receiving a separate territory. Then, finally, appeared Judah, the lion's cub, whose name meant praise. It was he, not the firstborn, who received the royal scepter. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. In these words was laid the entire history of future Israel and its Messiah. Jacob saw in him King David, King Solomon, and all future rulers. Judah was to become the foundation of the nation. Zebulun heard a prophecy about a seafarer who would dwell by the seashore. Issachar was named a hard-working donkey, bowing his shoulder to the burden of tribute, but his destiny was to find rest in the fertile land. Dan became a judge, a serpent biting the horse's heel, foretelling his cunning and strength in battle. Each son received his lot, his psychological characteristic, his place in the epic. But the most enduring and solemn was the blessing of Joseph. Jacob expressed all his love and bitterness in this speech. He called him a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. He recalled how his soul suffered. The archers sorely grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But above all this, he exalted Joseph, proclaiming, "By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my forefathers to the bounds of the everlasting hills." Joseph was crowned as a prince among his brothers. When he finished, his face, worn by years, glowed with a peace that surpassed human understanding. He had fulfilled his mission. He had spoken his last, most important words. He pronounced, "I am being gathered to my people. Bury me not here, in Egypt, but there, in the Holy Land, in the cave in the field of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah rest, Isaac and Rebekah, and where I buried my Leah." This was his final will, his spiritual testament, confirming that even in death, he remained faithful to Canaan. And, laying his hands on his chest, Jacob, Israel, passed into eternity, like a ship quietly disappearing beyond the horizon. Chapter 5. The Deaths of Jacob and Joseph. Jacob's death sparked a wave of grief that swept from his bedside to Pharaoh's own throne. Joseph, the mighty vizier, fell upon his father's face. In that moment, he was not the second man in the empire, but once again the small, beloved son. He wept over him with bitter, unrestrained tears, kissing him, showing the filial devotion and honor that should have been given to him earlier. By order of Pharaoh, who showed deep respect for his savior and his father, Jacob's body was embalmed. This was an Egyptian custom that ensured the body would be preserved for the long journey and future glory. The process lasted 40 days, and all of Egypt, out of respect for Joseph, mourned Jacob for 70 days, a period usually reserved for mourning Pharaoh himself. Then began the monumental, epic journey. It was not just a funeral, but a state act that testified to the greatness of Israel. A massive funeral procession consisting of all Jacob's sons, Pharaoh's nobles, the highest servants of the court, and mighty chariots, headed toward Canaan. Along the way, their mourning was so great and loud that the place where they stopped to lament was named Abel Mizraim, the mourning of Egypt. It was a bridge that connected two great civilizations in an act of respect for the Patriarch. Finally, reaching Canaan, they laid Jacob in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought from the sons of Heth for 400 shekels of silver. There, in that sole property the lineage of Abraham possessed in the Promised Land, were Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah rested, Jacob was laid. His sons stood nearby, filled with awe. It seemed that the very wind blowing over the hills whispered the words of God's promises above them, confirming that the covenant remained in force. After the burial, the brothers, who had never fully rid themselves of the pangs of conscience, again felt fear. They thought, "What if Joseph harbors resentment against us? And now that our father is gone, he will repay us for all the evil we did to him?" They sent messengers to him with the words, "Your father commanded before his death, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you.'" Joseph, hearing this, wept again. He did not just forgive them. He dispelled their fears with deep theological realization. "Am I in the place of God to repay you? You intended evil against me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." This was the ultimate forgiveness that concluded the drama of their lineage and transformed betrayal into an instrument of divine salvation. Joseph lived long, witnessing an era of greatness for his lineage. He saw the children and grandchildren of his sons, living to the generation of Ephraim's sons. When his death approached, his last words were a prophetic anchor for the future. He said, addressing his brothers and descendants, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then he made them swear an oath that they would not leave his remains in Egypt, but would carry his bones out with them. And when Joseph passed away, his body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. This coffin, standing in the midst of a foreign land, was not just a tomb, but a silent, constant testament, awaiting the promised deliverance. It was a testimony of faith that despite the splendor of the Nile, their home was in Canaan,